So the first thing you want to do is you want to wash your mushrooms. I've already done that. They're all rinsed off. So here's what I'm using, brown gramini mushrooms. Now here's the important thing about cleaning a mushroom. People and chefs say that if you rinse a mushroom, you basically rinse off the flavor. And they say to clean off the dirt, use a wet paper towel and just kind of wipe it. I personally don't notice lack of flavor by rinsing them, but I do rinse them in a certain way. So I have the water very low, on a very low pressure. I put the mushroom under the water, and I just wipe the dirt off the mushroom with my finger. So I do wet them under the faucet, but with low pressure water, and I just wipe it off with my hand. What you want is arborio rice, because arborio rice cooks better than any other rice. According to Gordon Ramsay, it's basically the rice that's meant specifically for risotto. Add some olive oil to our fucking pan. I know it's dark, but there you go, there's the olive oil in the pan. I find that a good portion of rice for just one person is half a cup. But this is enough for just me, half a cup of arborio rice. And let's take some chicken broth that hasn't, remember the chicken broth I use is no salt chicken broth, a little bit healthier. I don't put any salt in this at all. Remember I told you, I don't use the white cooking wine anymore, but you can use it, no fucking problem. And for the wine, here's how much you would put. Let me just stand out of the light. Maybe about that for the wine. Now we're going to pretend that I'm adding in the broth for the first time. So for the broth, this is quite a bit to explain here, so let me do this for you. You want to get a little spoon like this, a little ladle, and you want to stir. Gordon will tell you in his tutorial that when you make risotto, you have to stir it slowly the whole time. Just stir and stir and stir and stir and just keep fucking stirring slowly. Now, risotto is an interesting thing to cook. I'm going to tell you what the chefs say, and then I'll tell you what I do, because I do things the fucking lazy way. Now, they say, do not just dump a whole ton of chicken broth in here and cook the rice. Here's why. They say if you just dump in all the broth first and then cook it with the broth, since the broth is cold and you're putting in a large portion of it, the rice will become soggy. I do dump it in, like as you just saw me do, but I don't really notice it being that soggy, to be honest, so I don't really care. I just do it anyway. Now here's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to put in a little bit of broth, like a small amount. Stir it until it absorbs, pour a little more. Stir it until it absorbs, pour a little more. Stir it until it absorbs, pour a little more. And you do this non-stop until the rice is cooked. Now the reason they say to do this, and by the way, when I say a little more, this is the amount they mean. Ready? Like that. Now here's why they say to do that. When you put in a small amount, the rice will not be so hot that it will just fry. But it also won't be so cold that it goes soggy. When you pour in a little bit at a time, keeping the temperature around medium, it allows the rice to cook and absorb the liquid without becoming soggy or fried. It stays in the middle and just boils into the rice. Now, as I told you, and as you saw, I just dumped in a whole fucking shitload of broth. I didn't really care, but that's okay because I'm still gonna need more. All the broth you're seeing in here right now is going to absorb, and I'm guaranteed to need more. I just start off with a large amount, and then once this broth is absorbed, then I start putting it in slowly. I just start with a large amount. Now, one other thing to note. If you are gonna use the white cooking wine, you have to do something called reducing. This means that you cook off the alcohol, because you want the flavor of the white wine, but not the flavor of the alcohol in the wine. So you do something called reducing. This is where the white wine cooks in, but the alcohol evaporates. You actually want to cook off the wine, the alcohol first, before putting in the broth. Because if you go wine and then broth, the alcohol absorbs into the broth, and it actually doesn't reduce. Well, it does reduce, but just not very much. So you want to make sure that that strong scent of alcohol is gone. Then start putting in your chicken broth, okay? Now, when do you season? You don't. You don't ever season the rice. When you put your mushrooms into your other pan, you put the seasonings with the mushrooms. We're gonna turn on the wok now. We're gonna coat the wok with some olive oil. About that much is good. You wanna make sure that your olive oil coats the whole like outer rim of the wok or pan, whatever the hell you're using. Here's my bowl of mushrooms all cut up. This might seem like a pretty big bowl, right? It probably is, sliced mushrooms. However, trust me when I say that this is enough for just one person, because mushrooms cook down to 1/4, a quarter of their size. Because mushrooms just get so fucking tiny. It's crazy how small they actually get. So if you want to feed like 4 people, I would advise you to buy a package of mushrooms, but buy 3 packs of mushrooms. What's the size? This pack of mushrooms was about 370 grams or milligrams, whatever the hell the measurement is, like 370 for a package. If you're feeding 4 people, buy 3 of them. Honestly, a bowl about this big, but buy 3 of them. I'm just gonna dump in here some fresh garlic. I'm too lazy to actually buy garlic cloves and cut them up, so I literally buy a bottle of pre-made fresh garlic. And then we're gonna dump the mushrooms directly into the wok. Take a look at that. Take a look at the sheer size of that. That looks like a lot of mushrooms, but wait until the mushrooms are done. You'll notice it's fucking nothing. You need to make sure that you're constantly stirring around the mushrooms, because otherwise the mushrooms will stick to the bottom of the pan. Get that oil on them, get that garlic on your mushrooms. I'm gonna start seasoning my mushrooms. Onion, oregano, rosemary, basil, some nice pepper. Now don't forget, you can use multiple different kinds of mushrooms. I'm only using brown gramini mushrooms, but you can mix in brown gramini, portobello, white mushrooms, whatever. Just mix them all together and get yourself some good flavors in there. So remember, I put all of my seasoning in the mushrooms, not the rice. So at this point, we're probably gonna wanna put in a little bit more chicken broth. Let that absorb. And as you can see, this is like really healthy, you know? Mushrooms with some seasoning, not an ounce of salt, salt-free chicken broth, I mean, and a creamy arborio rice, I mean, there's nothing unhealthy here. This is actually like an amazing borderline vegan thing. The only thing that's not gonna make it vegan is when I include the butter and the Parmesan cheese. Literally everything else in here is fucking vegan. But even with the butter and Parmesan cheese, it's still vegetarian at best. We just really want to cook off the water, because what makes mushrooms so big is the water. And as the water cooks out, the mushrooms get smaller. It's at this point I'm going to add some butter to the rice. Don't worry about measuring. Fuck measuring. Who cares? Here's a stick of butter. Don't measure. Use your heart. Do what you think feels right. I cut myself a chunk of butter about that big. Dump it right into the rice. Now make sure to also stir in that butter. Make that rice even creamier. This is basically the only thing that's going to go into the rice, aside from cooking wine, olive oil, and chicken broth, that would be considered a seasoning. I don't know, should I talk like Gordon Ramsay? Right! Make sure you cook the fucking rice. You don't want it to be too fucking crispy, you donkeys. Stir that rice. Caress that rice. Make sure that you fucking stir. I can't do a Gordon Ramsay voice at all, but anyway. It's amazing. Amazing, okay? Okay, amazing, okay? Amazing. Ah, he always does this fucking snapping. You want Gordon Ramsay's full thing here, you gotta ignore a couple of the lazy changes I made, such as buying the fresh chives, dice them up, throw them in the mushrooms, and cook them with the mushrooms. That will give it an extra kick. I don't personally care that much, so that's why. Alright, now here's the fun part. Now that the rice has finally cooked through, we're gonna dump our seasoned mushrooms right in there while the rice is still cooking. Now we're gonna mix the mushrooms into the rice. And now the final touch. Parmesan cheese. You can get fresh Parmesan. Obviously this is not fresh Parmesan. In fact, this is, you know, fake fucking Kraft Parmesan, but still tastes good, whatever. And yes, you put the Parmesan cheese and cook it in. You don't put it on after, you cook it into the rice and mushrooms. You really want to double and triple this up if you want to feed multiple people. Alright, and there it is, Gordon Ramsay's version of a mushroom risotto. Beautiful, isn't it?